Good morning, guys. Hopefully, you guys had a great day yesterday. It was really nice to see you all on the Zoom session. Really miss seeing you guys, hearing you guys' voices, and I'm glad that you guys are all doing well and you guys are staying busy. For those of you that have turned in the Earth Day project already, you guys are doing a great job. I told you it wasn't going to take too long. I especially like those of you that actually uploaded videos of you. That was really cool. So I'm still looking forward to seeing all of it. Remember, it's not due until Friday. Another reminder, don't forget that tomorrow, Friday, we are going to have our first live sessions. So make sure that you guys are logging in, 6th grade, 9 o'clock, 7th grade, 10, and 8th grade at 11. So make sure you guys all log in on Friday because Friday is our live class and there will be no video. So it's just going to be strictly a live class. So make sure you guys log in. Also, hopefully you guys got to enjoy the Pokemon movie. If the link didn't work for you, just try it again. And let me know what you guys think of the movie and how it's better than the new one that they put on Netflix. So hopefully you enjoyed that. Anywho, with that being said, let's go ahead and jump in today's content. Alrighty, so yesterday we talked about the new machines and processes and how this guy named Samuel Slater, it all started in Britain, and how Samuel Slater stole the ideas and remembered all the blueprints and then brought it to the US to start his own business. And when he did this, he introduced it to everybody and everyone loved it and was like, perfect, let's go ahead and do it. But don't forget, the real breakthrough happened. Oh, also, don't forget that a lot of these factories or these mills were starting off in New England or in the north because of all the rivers and streams, and they needed the rivers or they needed the water for all the power. But they did have a breakthrough during the time where the US was getting ready to go to war with France and it needed weapons. So the government said, we need a bunch of guns, build them now. But unfortunately, when they were making them, they made them really slow. And if anything was to break on these guns, they wouldn't be able to fix it because everyone's guns were individual guns and they weren't really unified. So they needed an advancement in technology. So one thing led to another, and this guy named Eli Whitney, he came about and he decided, you know what, why don't we do something called interchangeable parts? Why don't we just make items all the same? We'll use machines, and that's in case a part breaks or in case we need to replace something, it'll be quicker, it'll be easy, and we don't have to take a long time. And the president was like, perfect idea, let's go ahead and let's see it. Eli Whitney proved them, showed them that they can make these guns with interchangeable parts, and that kind of sparked off the Industrial Revolution in the US, and they're like, perfect, we're gonna start to do this. Because of this process of making interchangeable parts and making things all the same and uniform, they're able to start to mass produce a lot of different things, and that's how everything is done today. Like, think of your cars, they're mass produced, computers are mass produced, video games are, and if there was to need a replacement, you just send it in, they'll replace the part and send it right back to you. So all this happened because of the war and because they needed guns. So believe it or not, everything happened because of guns. So let's go ahead and review from the questions from yesterday. So number one, how did Eli Whitney's influence American manufacturing? So Eli Whitney, the way he was able to influence American manufacturing was he came up with the idea of interchangeable parts. And when he proposed this idea to producing guns using water power machinery, it was a hit, it was a success, and that's how everything started to go, okay, maybe we should start manufacturing all goods and not just guns. Number two, why were most American mills located in New England? Remember, most American mills were located in New England because the region had a lot of rivers and streams. And they needed these rivers and streams to power the mills because remember, everything was water powered. And at this time, also, a lot of these people in the north were very rich and they really relied on manufacturing, so they invested into these mills in New England. Number three, how did the idea of interchangeable parts lead to mass production? So the idea of interchangeable parts led to mass production because instead of producing parts hand by hand and having everything customized, these machines produce identical parts, which allowed everything to be produced to produce mass quantities. So now they can produce abundance of things because everything had the same parts and everything was a standard and everything was the same. So that's how mass or interchangeable parts led to mass production. So today what we're going to talk about is, although they had these breakthroughs, it was really hard to get everybody in America to jump on board with manufacturing. Just like the saying, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. That's kind of like how it was in America. although manufacturing was proven to be the most successful and the best option, they had a really slow start to it. But we are going to talk about how the War of 1812, the war we just talked about before we went to break, how it actually sped up the manufacturing, and how this war, not only did it prove that the U.S. can need to rely on themselves and built camaraderie and national identity, this also sparked the Industrial Revolution, and from there on, it's history. Everything became manufacturing. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So the reason why we had a slow start to manufacturing is, like I was saying, people did not want to change the ways of living. So in 1800, Secretary of Treasury Albert Gallatin and others, they believed that only a few people would choose to work in factories if they could own their farmland. So his reason being was that we just expanded the United States. We doubled our size with the Louisiana Purchase. We have all this available land. So why would people want to move to the cities and work in factories where they have to pay other people when they can actually just start to build farms on their own land and make money that way? So that was one idea of why we had a slow start. Even though we had all this land, people did not want to pay other people, and they thought, well, we can just own our own land and start our own businesses. However, in Britain land was more scarce and was more expensive. So people would rather work for these low wages in the factories because they didn't have the land to start their own businesses. So with that being said, the United States, it took a little while for them to catch on because they were trying to be independent. But in Britain, the reason why the Industrial Revolution went and started off with a bang was because there wasn't enough land for everybody. It was expensive to own land, so they'd rather go to the factories and work in these factories and get paid a little bit of money. So that's why British people were more willing to work for lower wages in factories than in the United States. Because remember, in the factories, they were going to get paid a little bit of money because the machines were doing all the work. So that's why. So that's kind of the very beginning of why we started off with a slow start. But don't get me wrong, the US are going to pass up the British, because just like the tortoise and the hare, we are the turtle and we're going to pass them up. So because in Britain, they had a bunch of manufacturers and factories, the manufacturers had a bunch of factory workers with technical skills, and they could produce a lot or large amounts of goods less expensively than most American businesses. Okay, so Britain was using this idea to say, we're going to produce the same goods that you do, but we're going to be able to charge you for a smaller price. Okay. So consequently, they had charged low prices for their goods. So of course people are going to buy the British goods because they cost cheap, or they were cost less. So the lower British prices made it difficult for many American manufacturers to compete with the British companies. This situation in turn discouraged a lot of the American investors from spending money needed to build these new factories and machineries in the US. As a result, only few industries had found a place in the American economy, and this included factories that made clothes, cloth, cotton goods, millings, flour millings, weapons, and iron production. Alright, so because Britain was able to charge these low prices, people were still buying them from Britain, and this kind of discouraged people to invest in these factories in the US because they can just simply buy the goods at a cheaper price from Britain. But when the War of 1812 came, if you guys remember the Embargo Act and all these different acts that were going on, this war actually changed everything. It changed the way the American people thought. It changed the way people are going to run the economy. And it just changed how we're going to depend on Britain. Because remember, we blocked them from trade and we didn't get anything from them. It didn't really have an effect for the British or the French, but it did have an effect on the American people. Okay, so during the War of 1812, since the wars in 1790s, the wars between the European powers had interfered with the U.S. trade. Remember, they were having pirates coming and stealing the manufactured goods off the boats. The Americans had to come up with a new way. So the American customers were no longer able to get the manufactured goods they were used to buying from Britain and from other European manufacturers, thanks to the Embargo Act. Remember, that got the American people really upset because they couldn't buy anything anymore. So then, during the War of 1812, when the British ships blocked the eastern seaports, preventing foreign ships from delivering goods, the Americans began to come up with a new idea, and they had this idea saying that we need to start buying items we need, and we need to start producing items that we need here in America. And that's exactly what they started to do. They decided that we're going to start supplying, building, and producing goods that we need in America, and we're going to sell them to our American people because we cannot really rely on the foreign trade with Britain anymore. So as the profits for American factories grew, manufacturers began to spend more and more money expanding their factories, and people started to build more factories because they realized that we can make money selling our products just to the American people because we have nowhere else to get these areas. So state banks, private investors, they all began to lend money to these manufacturers for them to start building these factories in the U.S. So the War of 1812, remember the Embargo Act, how it's all coming together. Since we blocked and banned all trade, Americans needed their supplies, they needed their goods, so they decided we're just going to go ahead and produce them ourselves in America, and this kind of sparked everything for the U.S. and the manufacturing business in America. So while this was going on, the Americans, they started to realize that we got to go away from our dependence on other people. So while this was happening, the Americans began to realize that the United States had been relying too much on foreign goods. They were relying too much on Britain, they were relying too much on the European countries, and they decided we need to become independent. And this is kind of like what President Trump was talking about earlier when he first got elected. We are relying too much on China, too much on all these other foreign goods. We need to start bringing everything back to the U.S. So in the photo, if you see the paper airplanes, that's the U.S. in the yellow, and they're going to go their own separate ways. Okay, so the United States, they believed that they could not meet their own needs, it might weaken their government and open them to attacks from all foreign countries. So the former president Thomas Jefferson, who once opposed manufacturing, remember he was from the agriculture area, he did not agree with manufacturing, he thought in agriculture. He decided, all right, I'm gonna change my mind, and we realized that yes, we do need to start having these factories and building our own goods and manufacturing our own goods here in the States. Okay, so Jefferson, as the president, he realized that we are relying too much on foreign people, just like how Washington warned us in the very beginning, and decided we need to start moving and supporting manufacturing. So in February 1815, when the War of 1812 finally ended, the New Yorkers celebrated, and we all returned to free trade. The streets were filled with merchants whose ships were loaded with goods, and eager business people were prepared to lead the United States into this industrial revolution. So once the war was open and the manufacturers were built, they started to produce everything, and everyone started to get really happy because now everything was getting produced in America. During this time, though, they also wanted to vote, and they started to vote for stricter government laws. Remember I was telling you about the tariffs on imports and exports and these shipping laws and regulations? And the reason why was they wanted these tariffs to be passed for people, so like if you want to buy something from Britain, it would be more expensive, because they wanted everyone to start buying American goods. And while this was happening, they started to get American pride, and everything they wanted to do was America, because remember, they shut off all foreign trade, they just won the war, so they're all excited about being Americans. So now everything they want to buy must be American made, and that kind of sparked the Industrial Revolution in the United States. So as a quick review, we talked about how even though the U.S. had a slow start to manufacturing, they became one of the most successful and the most relied on sources in the world. Even to this day, the U.S. is relied on heavily to build and manufacture things. One thing that you may not know is that the U.S., they are the #1 supplier of airplanes and airplane parts for the whole world, which is kind of cool. So as a quick review, they started off slow because remember, in the United States had all this available land, and people did not want to build factories because they could start their own businesses with their own farming, and they didn't want to do that. In Britain, land wasn't available, and it was really expensive to own land, so they would rather work in factories and get paid these low wages. Eventually, though, these lower prices of British goods started to put American businesses out, or Americans out of business, because they were realizing we can just buy the stuff from Britain at a cheaper price. But remember, this all changed during the War of 1812 when we passed the Embargo Act and we stopped all trade with foreign countries. During this time, we still needed to get our goods, so what we started to do was we started to build our own American factories and supplying and building these goods for the American people. When the American people realized that we can start doing this on our own, we can actually make money this way, people started to invest, and more factories started to pop up in America. At this time, Jefferson also realized that maybe we should we're relying way too much on foreign goods, so we should start building them in-house in the United States and selling them to the Americans. And that's exactly what happened. So Jefferson started to support the manufacturing business and start to realize that maybe farming isn't the best way and we should support manufacturing and jump on this industrial revolution train. When the war ended, industrial revolution and factories was booming in the United States and everything was going well, so they started to ask for more laws and more tariffs to protect American businesses from the foreign goods. All right, so that's what we talked about to this day. So for homework, I want you guys to answer these 3 questions. How did the War of 1812 and the growth of American how did the War of 1812 aid or support the growth of American manufacturing? Number 2, according to Albert Galton, why were there so many factories being built in the United States? Why? This goes back to the very first slide. Why was there no factories in the U.S. and why were there so many in Britain? Number 3, why was manufacturing in Great Britain in the early years more successful than that in the United States? So why was Britain a lot better than the U.S.? Think about what the U.S., think about what we relied on and stuff like that. So that is our lesson for today. If you have any questions, feel free to message me or ask me any questions you want. Like I was telling you guys yesterday in the Zoom session, the Industrial Revolution really changed the world for everyone. Nowadays, we just see it as normal, but back then it was changing everything. That's why it was a revolution. And it all sparked because of guns and war. So it's kind of crazy how that stuff works. Don't forget that tomorrow we are having a live meeting, a live class, so there will be no video. So tomorrow when you log into our Zoom, it'll be a live class and we'll review and we'll go as is. Okay? If you don't have any questions, I hope you guys have a great day and I'll see you guys all tomorrow.